Welcome everyone to COAC Detroit, and welcome you to Intro to Finding Grants, our session for today. For those who don't know who we are, COAC is a hub that accelerates transformational impact with nonprofits, community organizations in Southeast Michigan through collaborative ideas, cross-sector resources, and ethical access to world-class programming and learning opportunities. That's the COAC. Lovely picture. And our core values, equity, access and inclusion, transparency and trust, quality, excellence, collaborative learning culture, and disruption of status quo. So, and this is Introduction to Finding Grants. And there is the lovely Trish, who is going to be our facilitator today. And me, Asteria Rogan, and I will be the co-facilitator. So okay, so now we're going to start today's session. So I'm going to turn it over to Trish.
Thank you, the lovely Asteria. So in addition to being a partner to COACT, I am also the CEO and principal advisor of a boutique consulting agency here in Detroit called Mondo Unlimited. And we support organizations statewide with capacity building, fund development resources, and as of the beginning of this year, also staffing and recruiting at the C-suite. COACT has been a client of mine since the beginning of this journey, and grateful to spend time with COACT, the organizations that seek support from COACT, and also to host pro bono coaching sessions through Collab Connect. And I know there are a couple of familiar names on the call here who have joined for those 45-minute sessions with not only me, but also other advisors in the region. So when Asteria breezed through some of the resources that COACT provides, I encourage all of you to go to the website, to follow COACT on social media, LinkedIn, well, you know, all the social media platforms, find them, follow them, sign up for the newsletter and engage, because they offer tremendous breadth and depth of services and support, and also lots of connections to organizations in the ecosystem like Michigan Community Resources. There are a couple of folks on here from that organization as well who help connect the dots and strengthen the ecosystem. So with that, this course is offered in support and partnership with Candid. Candid may or may not be familiar to you, but Candid is the mashup. It's a nonprofit organization based in New York City, but it's a mashup of the Foundation Directory and GuideStar, two organizations that help and support the nonprofit ecosystem. And so at the end of this course, you know, by no means will anybody necessarily be a grant-seeking expert, but you should feel much more fortified in your understanding of the grant-seeking process, be able to understand a little bit more about the nuances of grant-seeking, identify some opportunities to research and to attract and approach funders across the ecosystem. Excuse me. Just to name my actions, and to answer your question, Irene, yes, this session is being recorded. The team at COACT will edit it down. I don't think they'll edit out all of my ums and oohs, but they will certainly get it up and concise and put on their website. There are also recordings to previously hosted intro sessions. This is one in a series of 6. This is the first one we're hosting for 2024. But again, there are several that we'll be hosting together throughout the next several months. So if you find this helpful even a little bit, I hope you will come to some of those other sessions. So welcome. When we're done here, you should be able to describe the types of foundations and their goals, explain why funders give grants, talk about your individual organization's credibility, right? Credibility is an important part of seeking grants and getting funders to trust you. And then also plan your approach for seeking funding. Today, we're going to talk about, you can go ahead, Asteria, the 10 most important things you need to know about finding grants, and also hopefully demystify some of the biggest myths when you're looking for grants. So a lot of organizations and people think that all they need to do is get a few big grants to support their nonprofit organizations. You can go back to number one. But it's all right. You're just speeding me up.
Okay, there you go.
But it's really important to know that you definitely can't survive on grants alone. So I love to start this session just with the query, right? What do you think is the biggest source of private contributions to nonprofits? And maybe you already know this because you got a sneak peek at the previous slide. Don't be shy. Kelly B, individual donors. Yeah, you're exactly right. Now you can flip to the pie chart. And you didn't see the slide? And this is a chart from 2022. The 2023 data is currently being compiled and shared. Giving USA report, I think, is out or will be out shortly. But I fully expect the data to look very similar because year over year, it does look similar. And so if we look at the private sources of support for nonprofit organizations in the United States, you can see that while foundations and corporations do give, they really account for a modest proportion of that charitable giving. And the majority of giving comes from individuals, people like us that care about an organization, their schools, their places of worship. And so that hunk of this pie of giving is always much bigger than the other pieces. And so I'm curious why you might think that is. Why is it consistently that way? And why is it important to think about individuals when we're thinking about our fund development mix?
Oh, I gotta put these things in the.
You still got coffee in here, you know?
I can't tell, Suzanne, if you're answering the question or if you accidentally came off mute. Long-term contributors. Money, yes. I mean, the simplest way to think about it really is relationship building. Yes, long-term relationships. Yes, yes, yes. Good feelings, hopefully. Yes, we love that. Have a stake in the nonprofit mission. Yes, everybody's had their coffee. Still working on mine. I mean, the simplest version of the answer is there are just simply more people in the world than there are foundations and corporations put together. So that's one piece of it. But also, as many of you mentioned, right, individuals care, right? And they start with giving small gifts, and with appropriate and proper relationship building, they can become more loyal, more generous. With cultivation, gifts could grow to include bequests, trusts, planned giving. Like that's a journey upon which we love to take our individual donors. So when we talk about individuals, we're not just talking about wealthy people. Our presidential campaigns have consistently shown us year over year that if we can reach and attract individual donors, even with modest gifts, that those individuals become more loyal, stay close to our organizations. So while foundations and foundation support can be a really good part of your overall grant seeking strategy, you can't rely on foundations alone. You're going to need to develop all kinds of streams of revenue from a variety of resources. And so when we think about how to do that, like that's a whole additional set of skills and tools. And I hope you'll consider joining us for the introduction to fundraising planning so we can talk about how we maneuver our limited resources in these other places and spaces. It's also important to note as we get ready to go into this training a little bit more that, you know, oftentimes organizations think they can rely on just a few large grants from a couple of big foundations. But the reality is that most grants come from smaller, local, more regionally based foundations, and in smaller amounts. And so we'll explore a little bit later how to find funders, so that, you know, you can set your prospecting wheels into motion. I think it's also important to note at this point that in the Metro Detroit area, we're tremendously lucky to be physically situated near and amongst some of the wealthiest foundations in the nation. So Kresge and Kellogg are big and generous organizations. And so we have a position of privilege here in Detroit that other organizations don't necessarily have. All right. So something that I like, Esther, we'll go to the next slide. Not all foundations are alike. And so I like to tell people, if you've seen one foundation, you know one foundation. And that just means that every foundation is different. They all vary. They have different interests. They have different motivations. And it's important to sort of uncover, like individuals, what's important to those foundations as you begin to approach them. So thinking about what do we mean by this, Estera, can you mute folks? And then if we have questions, I really encourage you to come off mute, but I'm getting a little just feedback.
Got that, okay.
Thank you.
I was trying to do that, I couldn't see everybody. Okay.
So what do we mean by not all foundations are alike? Let's pop to the next slide. So there are a few different types of foundations. So let's just start by acknowledging that the term foundation in an organization's name doesn't necessarily mean that it gives away money. So like there are hospital foundations and university foundations that are set up in a way with the IRS that they can receive foundations, but they may not necessarily re-grant to external organizations. So it's just something to be aware of as you consider funders to approach. Just because it says foundation in the name doesn't mean that they're going to give money. Also, conversely, same way, some private foundations with big grant making initiatives don't have the word foundation in their name at all, like the Carnegie Corporation or the Duke Endowment. There are lots of different kinds of grant makers. So private foundations are the type that most of you have heard of. And there are three major categories. So there's independent or private foundations, and those are going to be the grant making organizations whose funds are typically they typically come from an individual or a group of individuals or a family, and also oftentimes include a family name. And so some of those really big ones that are probably well known to you include Gates, Ford, Kellogg, MacArthur. And so the vast majority of independent private foundations are very, very small, many of which are referred to as family foundations because of a high degree of family involvement, which the more you know about how the foundations are established and who makes the decisions, the more effective you can be in grant seeking. Because many of the smaller family foundations don't have staff, that's a good reason, or one of the major reasons, that some only accept invitation applications by invitation only. And I know as you identify potential funders, seeing invitation only can feel like a non-starter for many of you. I would encourage you not to see that as a do not enter sign. I would encourage you to begin to be curious about that and learn about how those individual foundations could become more aware of you and the work of your organization and get you ready to be a viable organization invitation for that individual foundation. Another kind of foundation is a company-sponsored foundation or corporate foundation. We see a tremendous amount of support here in the Metro Detroit area from corporate foundations. These are typically private foundations whose funds come from the contributions of a for-profit business. Company-sponsored foundation may retain close ties with the donor company, but it is an independent foundation, independent organization with its own endowment, typically its own board of directors, and is subjected to the same rules and regulations of private foundations. So a local example might be the General Motors Foundation. And then a private foundation that works a little bit differently is an operating foundation. Excuse me, and this is like the hospital and university foundations that I briefly mentioned a little bit earlier, but operating foundations may award some grants, but the total is generally small relative to the funds used for that foundation's own programming. All right, so round number 3 of the things that you must take away. Oh, Asteria, if you don't mind, I know you dropped it in before folks came in, but a link to the handout that has the list of the 10 things you could take away at the end of this. We will email it to you, but also if you want to follow along with the 10 things that you should take away at the end of this, is a little handy little cheat sheet here. So the beautiful thing about foundations, oh, I'm sorry, Asteria.
I just put the link in the chat.
Thank you. So private foundations have to give away money. They're regulated by the IRS, and they have to give away a minimum of 5% of their prior year's assets, which can be averaged out over a few years. But because of this, oh, thank you. Because of this, they have to annually report to the IRS who they've given grants to and how much they've given by submitting a 990 private foundation form to the IRS. This is important for us to be aware of, because while you as 501c3 organization submit a 990 to the IRS for your operations, there's a bit of an accountability piece that comes to that. The foundations also have to do this, and that gives us a tremendous amount of information from which we can research opportunities. And we'll get into a little bit more later some very specific tools to use to research foundations. But this requirement from the IRS gives Candid very good information about who's receiving funds, that then makes you as grant-seeking organizations much more informed about who you should approach and for what. And so the foundation directory online is an online database for grant seeking, and I'll share a little bit about that with you later, but I will also encourage you to join the team at COACT for drop-in work days, or to visit when they have open office hours, because the foundation directory online is available for you to use for free through COACT. All right, we'll do next slide. So in addition to private foundations, there are lots of other categories of grant makers. And so we've already seen that some corporations set up the company-sponsored foundations. Others give directly through what are known as direct corporate giving programs, which are grant-making programs established and administered within a profit-making company. And so it's important here, especially in our region, because we have a lot of very generous corporate funders, to understand the nuances of these different kind of funders. So unlike corporate foundations, they are not a separate entity from the corporation, and their annual grants and grant making totals are generally directly related to the company's current profits. So we will be doing a session for free later on for Intro to Corporate Giving that can talk a little bit more about how to navigate those particular partnerships and relationships. So I encourage you to join us for that. And then the final category of grant makers are grant making public charities. And so these are public foundations, and they're usually supported pretty substantially by contributions from individuals, corporations, and foundations, just like other nonprofits. but they'll receive their funds from a variety of sources instead of a single source like private foundations. So some local examples like that would be the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. Community foundations are typically public charities that make grants for charitable purposes. And we have several community foundations in our ecosystem in our region. Another version of a public charity would be like a population or issue-oriented foundation. For example, the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. That would be an example of an issue-oriented foundation, or the Global Fund for Women is an example of a population-focused foundation. And so just as corporations can establish private foundations, they also may set up public charities as fundraising vehicles like the Avon Foundation for Women. All right. So we'll do the next one. We're going to move on to thinking about funder motivations. So I'm curious just to hear from the audience, maybe drop in a chat or come off mute if you're comfortable. What do you think? No, don't give away the answers. I don't know if there's the answers. You're good. You're good.
Sorry,
What do you think?
For the answers. Forgive
You're
me.
all right. What do people think the motivations are for a corporation? What might be some reasons that corporations give? Marketing be a very big reason.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, to show a connection to community or involvement, community involvement.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of local partners will set up volunteer opportunities for the employees, investing in community. Exactly. There's some great answers in the chat if you want to scroll through there. And the reality is corporate funders usually do have more than a pure philanthropic interest, right? They would give money to advance their business objectives, right? Through visibility, through, with the goal of enhancing their image and their community ties, while also giving back to the community where their employees and consumers live and work. Politics, yes, that can be a strong motivator, especially in certain seasons. And our grant-making public charities, right, like community foundations, can be very, very visible in the communities that they serve and want to assist with all kinds of varieties of issues and folks in those communities. Tax deductions, sure. Yeah. Beautiful answers. Thank you. All right, number 4. Grant seeking, and we can go to the next one. Grant seeking is super competitive. It is, I've never heard a foundation say, I was able to fund everybody who had a really beautiful project to the fullest extent that they needed, right? And I think it's important to recognize that there is a competitive process, but we're not in competition with one another, right? We're essentially in competition with ourselves to tell the most compelling story. But before we get to the position of telling compelling stories, there are a couple of things that you need to do, right? You need to have a strong relationship, but you also need to be a credible organization. And so when approaching funders for support, a big question is, how do you prove that you're a credible nonprofit organization with the capacity to carry out that well-planned, well-articulated purpose or project? So you have to be able to show that it's not just, your request is not just about the need of your organization, which we all know, right? You have tremendous need for resources and capacity. But more importantly, it's about the people you're serving and the impact that it will make. And so when we think about seeking grants and we think about the grant writing, we want to center this idea of how is what you're asking for going to change lives? So for example, if you're asking for money to renovate a building or hire new staff, both of which are important parts of the work that many organizations do, I encourage you to think about, when you write your case for investment, your case for support, your ask, what difference will that new building or that new staff make in your community and to the people you serve? How will it better help you to achieve or to advance your mission? And so when we think about building this credibility, which is an important part of getting ready for grant seeking, if you want to go to the next slide, this area, there are a few basic sort of boxes to check when we're thinking about building credibility. There has been a movement in our social impact sector lately to move towards trust-based giving, which is a beautiful path. While also our investors are still looking at how to differentiate between all of the organizations that are seeking their support. So the more we as nonprofit leaders can prepare our organizations to be positioned as the most credible organization, that just gives us another leg up as we're seeking grants for your organizations. So, credibility. I could ask you what leads to credibility, what provides credibility, but they already put the answers on the slides for us. Oh no, they didn't. Oh.
Nope. I only put one up there so far.
Excellent. What do you think adds to credibility? How do you prove to funders and prove to your constituents that you're a credible organization? Metrics. Right? We all know that funders are looking for successful nonprofits or even emerging nonprofit organizations that are capable of doing the work that they're promising in the proposal. But how do you demonstrate that to a funder? How do you show it? Expertise. Asteri, can you read some of them? I can't see them because I've got too many screens
Expertise, active social media and website, connection to the community served, community partners.
Yeah, strong leadership, right? Projects, yes.
Well thought out budgets for both the organization and the project.
Governance structure in place, audits, yes, sometimes audits are an important part of that. I think financial infrastructure for organizations that are too small to require an audit, right? Good financial infrastructure and planning.
Demonstrate passion and commitment.
Yes. I think a compelling mission, right? A compelling mission that is also compatible with the funder's focus area, right? Good, strong leadership, supported staff, all of those are really beautiful ways to add credibility. Yes, sustainability. And I think that one's hard, right? Because sometimes we don't need to sustain. Sometimes we need just to get in, do the thing and be done. But yes, sustainability, when foundations and individuals are making investments, will oftentimes get questioned about how will you sustain this program or how will you grow your organization as a result of these investments. And those are important things to think about, not only as you're approaching funders, but also like, why do we do what we do? Do we do this to exist in perpetuity, or do we do this to exist? Do we exist to solve a problem? And so just thinking through the answers to those questions as you begin to navigate the funder conversations is important. So this next part might feel a little bit like a commercial, and it's really not. But one part of your fundraising plan and a way to demonstrate credibility, Esther, if you want to go to the next slide, is to seek a seal of transparency through Candid. And this, I think, as organizations, how many of you actually have claimed your nonprofit organization's Candid profile? Just raise your hand or drop a yay or shout. Excellent.
Oh, okay.
And if you don't know what it is, that's okay too. But I encourage you to go to Candid, search for your organization, and claim your profile. It's free to do. And it's a really great way for you as organizational leader to share information about your mission and the work of your organization with millions of potential donors. If you've filed a 990, chances are very, very high that your organization does have a Candid profile. And you can claim it and use it as a benchmarking tool for your organization. And so the Candid profiles have not only the IRS data that they pull in, but they also provide you the opportunity to create a more robust, publicly available picture of your organization and what it does in the community. And so what you have on the screen now are the various seals of transparency. And so when you complete your profile in different hunks of it, you can earn these seals of transparency. And these are really quick visual aids to indicate that you have filled in very specific key information about your nonprofit. And so with each level from bronze all the way up to platinum, you're encouraged to provide better insight into your work, and it'll help you stand out from other organizations as funders are using this as a tool to see who's doing what in the community. The amount of information you provide really depends on which of the seals you're going for. So for example, the platinum seal of transparency is like the highest seal that you can earn. And in order to do that, you've got to show progress at each of the prior levels, so they like build on each other. It's not like you have to, do bronze and then erase it and do silver and bronze, right? Like they all build on each other. But to earn these seals, you've got to just show some really basic transparency information. So, what do you do? How do you measure it? The Candid seal is important. Thank you, Malvena. And it not just the seal is important. I think it's just good nonprofit governance and operations to be able to show your mission, basic contact information, sort of like a checklist of is my public facing image of my organization, is it in line with what I actually do? And if people accidentally find me, do they have a good picture of what we do? And so working on sort of the basics, all the way up to, high level, it's all really, really good basic governance for nonprofit organizations. So I'd encourage you to get your seal of transparency and then to share it, to put it on your website, to use it as an opportunity to connect loudly and proudly across your social media channels and your newsletters, just to build that credibility and trust with donors who may or may not go to Candid ever. But individuals and organizations love to see that you're paying attention to industry standards. And so once you get these different levels, you can share it. And then donors have access to your profile. And so, some organizations will even go so far as to include these seals of transparencies in their email signature. But, it's up to you how much you use it. There is, Asteria, if you go to the next slide, do we have information about the Go for the Gold?
I think it's at the end. It's at the end.
Yep. That, do that thing that I
Go
just
down
talked
to it?
about. What's
Want me
that?
to go down to it or?
No. I'm just looking at the slide. You can go backwards. We will share with you a little bit more about the Go for the Gold promotion, which basically says, once you achieve gold seal of transparency, you have free access to the foundation directory online from where you are. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. All right. Yeah, let's get to doing the homework.
About that.
Next piece. Next
Next
do your
one.
homework. Yeah, the number 5, do your homework. When I'm working with organizations, a lot of times folks will say something like, Mackenzie Scott just gave $1 million to an organization that does the exact same thing that I do. How do I get her to give me money? And you don't really get Mackenzie Scott to give you money. She is a unique philanthropist. She's very generous. In my decades of fund development, the name changes, right? Sometimes it's Dan Gilbert, sometimes it's Oprah, sometimes it's Bill Gates, right? But there's always somebody who's going to be top of mind for you or for your board members or for somebody who just says, how do we get them to give us money? The reality is, first of all, you should never approach a grant maker unprepared. When seeking grant funding, you have to know as much as you possibly can about the foundation that you plan to approach before you approach them. And so part of what I counsel through CoLab and for my clients in particular is to as you are seeking grant funding, whether you're using a big fancy CRM like Salesforce, or you're working off an Excel spreadsheet, is to keep a list of all of your prospects, whether they're individuals, corporations, foundations, and rate them based on how likely they are to be funders to your organization. And so there's a bit of art and science to determining that. But inevitably, you're going to be in a meeting at some point, and somebody will say, "How about Dan Gilbert?" And just as a local example, right? If your organization does work that fits within the ROC's giving priorities, you could articulate that to your volunteer in a way that helps them to understand how they can get you closer to a successful ask with that organization. Also, you can keep them on the list as, here's the research we've done to determine why that grant maker might not be a good fit for our organization, so that you don't have to constantly go, no, but, so that you can keep your volunteers, your staff, yourselves focused on the highest and best likelihood of funding partners. And you can only know that if you've done your research. Carol, I can't tell if your hand is up because you have a question or if you were responding to something before, but I want to give you space to.
I was responding to something before. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, number 6. So this has typically been called really crudely, do not spray and pray, right? You're going to put together a beautiful case for investment. Don't just lob it to everybody you can think of that might have money and might want to give it to you. The one size fits all approach definitely does not work. And so just like individual donors, you have to create an individual strategy for each potential funder and tailor your proposal around who you're approaching and why. Now, if you've worked with me, you know that you've got to get really clear on that case for investment, your case for support. So what do you as an organization need to most effectively serve your community? And once you're really clear on that, it will help you to keep in your lane, right? I see oftentimes a tendency for organizations to maybe drift out of their lane, do a bit of mission drifting to fit a potential funder's giving priorities. And I really encourage you not to do that. Just because somebody gives money to a thing that might be adjacent to or near or a next door neighbor to the work that you're doing, stay really laser focused on your work, your constituency, who's true to you, because there's a tremendous power that comes with saying no to a funder who might not be values aligned, to identifying funders that don't fit with your organization strategies, right? So it's okay, but also one case for investment doesn't apply for every potential funder. So, for example, if you're let's see, the Great Lakes Literacy Center. I don't know much about your organization, but based on the name, Jennifer, I can assume that you help people with their literacy in and around the Great Lakes. So you may be approached with somebody who wants to talk about financial literacy as opposed to reading literacy. That may be an appropriate ask for you from a funder, or it may not. So just be really clear on which sieve you're pushing your funding opportunities through, and be prepared for them. Also, be nimble enough to modify your request so that it is compelling for the funders you seek. You have to find the right match. So this is where we get to be curious. Asteria number 7, it talks about, like, how do we do this, right? We've got to do research on our funding partners. So if you're looking to find grant makers that are good potential funders, you want to know, how do they match with your mission, your programs, your activities, and their funding interests? So the goal really in fundraising, all kinds of fundraising, is matchmaking. So how do we create a partnership between your individual organizations and the funder that can help solve problems or address issues that you both care about? And so one of the tools that we use an awful lot is the foundation directory. It's part of Candid. It was the old when I started fundraising, I used to have to go to the library and get this giant book off the shelf and flip through it to see which foundation supported things that I was doing. And, the minute you print it, it's obsolete. But the foundation directory is a really beautiful tool where you can search. They're very customizable searches to see who funds in your organization's specific area of interest. Oh, all of those words that are up there on the screen. So I'm not going to open a foundation directory online right now to show you because I'll get lost in the weeds and get really excited about a potential funder and we'll go totally off track. But I do encourage you to find access to the foundation directory online. You can certainly find it through COACT. But it gives you really robust opportunity to do prospect research by utilizing those 990s. Without going to every individual foundation's 990, sifting through the gobs of really boring information to find out, do they support organizations like mine? What size grants are they making to organizations so that when we're preparing our asks and preparing our strategies and preparing our budgets, we know sort of where those sweet spots are for funders. We can go to the next slide, Asteria. Excuse me. And so, yeah, right. So rather than going through these really boring tax documents, the foundation directory online can help to build and refine your prospect lists, find connections with key decision makers. They have a really robust piece of their output that includes who's on their board, who's on their staff, so that can help you begin to see where folks are and then determine how to best create prospecting strategies for each of these individual funders. You can access this foundation directory online just if you go to candid.org/find us or through COACT. COACT is a foundation directory online partner. I think Wayne State University is too. I don't know who else is because I just access it through COACT.
Yeah.
All right, so part of what you can find through the foundation directory online, number 8, you got to ask for the right amount. And this is some of that art and science of fundraising. So when you're doing your research, you have to find out, has this funder funded organizations that are like yours? And how much money should I ask for? And if you know those two things, you can get pretty well prepared to submit a request. So you'll get a really good idea of a funder's potential interest in you if you see that they have given to organizations or programs similar to yours in the past. Not necessarily a slam dunk. In fact, it's far from a slam dunk that they're going to give you funding, but it gives you clues that you should begin to start a relationship with funders that have history that aligns with what you do. And you can also compare several years worth of grant lists. So it can help you as a grant seeking organization determine if there's a giving pattern within that funder that matches your funding needs and requirements. It also helps to give you an idea of what you should ask for. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than in fundraising to ask for 5,000 when you should have asked for 50,000, or conversely, ask for 50 when you should have asked for 5. And I think the best way to determine that is through your relationship with your funding partner and supported by research, right? Just because a funder gives $100 million to one organization doesn't mean they're going to give you $100 million. So get comfortable with asking your program officers, if you can find a way to get to them, what that sweet spot might be. And to that point, right, number 9, you don't have to know someone to get a grant, but it certainly helps. And so, you're going to want to do your research to see if you can find a connection to somebody at a grant making organization. It's really hard to get a face-to-face meeting with a funder before you actually apply for something. So it's really helpful to use whatever contacts you might have to help set up meetings with funders to make those introductions. And ideally before you submit a proposal, right? They can give you really good information and feedback about your programming, provide counsel on what might be good information to put in the proposal, like what kind of projects and types of funding would they be interested in? What time of year should you apply if there's an ongoing open call? Also, you're going to want to make sure that you're building the relationship, right? Your board members and your volunteers can help to make introductions and to broker those partnerships, but it's really important that you as leaders of your organizations encourage and make a welcoming environment for those board members and volunteers to hand off the relationships and partners, because the relationship with funders should live within your organization and be supported by your volunteers. But when that board member moves on, your organization still needs to be holding those relationships. All right, and finally, the proposal isn't usually the first thing a foundation wants. You know, you're going to want to have, and this is just my recommendation, right? You're going to want to have your needs fully articulated before you pick up a phone or before you submit anything in writing. But when you make an initial approach with a funder, the goal of that funding conversation is to gauge their interest, right? With you already being very crystal clear on what you need, and what you're trying to do with the potential funding. And so have the proposal really well written so that if you get a green light from that initial funder call, you can easily tailor it, make some tweaks to meet the funder specific requirements, and then get it to them as soon as possible. And we are hosting, I'm pretty sure Asteria, we're doing an intro to proposal writing class, which is always a fun one to think about, like,
Yes.
what do we do? How do we articulate it? I would, if you can, and this is where it gets scary for folks sometimes, try to make a phone call. We're pretty insular right now. We text our kids, we text our husbands and partners. Try to make a phone call. Unless, giant asterisk, unless they say no phone calls, please. They really mean that. They don't want you to call them because they have limited resources. But when given a choice, I always try to use the most personal approach. It's better for relationship building. And again, foundation support seeking is about relationship building as much as it's about relationship building with individuals. So definitely try not to initiate the relationship by email because it can be really impersonal. It's really easy for somebody to move that to, I'll get to that later. You know, you certainly don't want to say, hi, nice to meet you. Here's my proposal. Will you give me money? Right? That doesn't make me feel like you want to get to know me. It's a two-way street with our funders, no matter what kind of funding partner they are. But if they're interested, right? If you can get somebody on the phone, if you can meet somebody in the community, if you can get that intro, they will probably have questions about your project, and you're going to want to be well prepared. And the best way to do that is to pretend like you're submitting a proposal to them already. So there is in the handouts, there should be an initial approach script. So, you know, write out your script before you pick up the phone, make it super succinct so that you can leave a voicemail if you need to. You know who you're talking to, know why you're approaching them. Be curious about them too, right? Ask funders questions. But you know, if they give you a 30-minute window to talk to them, keep it to 25 to 30 minutes. Definitely do not try to soak up that additional 15 minutes. They will get annoyed and probably not call you back the next time. All right. So, gosh, where did the time go? We have 5 minutes. All right, so you can see now the importance of being well prepared, right? You definitely do not want to approach a funder without having done your homework first. Needing a grant is only a part of the equation, right? We all know you need support to do the work that you need to do, but that's not the reason to approach a funder. You have to prove that you have the track record and or because there are many emerging nonprofits that don't yet have track record, capacity and credibility to carry out the work. And so once you have found a compelling match between what you're asking for and the funder's interest and motivations, then it's the fun part where you get to make that convincing argument based on what's in it for them and for your constituents, not just what's in it for your organization. All right, what's the next slide, Asteria? No, we don't have time for that.
Question?
Questions. And I will say this, just like in any of our other sessions, if you have questions and we don't get to them today, please email them. Asteria will be dropping a survey link and emailing one. If you have questions or still need more support, there are lots of ways. This certainly isn't a one and done. But who has burning questions or thoughts to share? What was your favorite thing you learned? Are you still there?
Hi, this is Catherine. Just wanted to say thanks for the refresher of all the information. And looking forward to hearing also about that intro to proposal writing option at some point too. A good refresher of also all the additional resources that COACT has.
Asteria, if you advance, is there a list? Do you have the upcoming sessions on a slide?
I have the upcoming one, yeah. It's on the.
There we go.
That's the next session that's coming up on May 9th.
That one's super
Introduction to
fun.
Foundation Directory Online.
I'm such a homer for Foundation Directory Online. There's so much great research to be done and information to help round out your grant seeking approach. Can be information overload, but certainly helps us get crystal clear. Thank you. I'm glad you found this helpful.
Yes.
Hi, this is Latanya Clark. Can you hear me?
Hi, Latanya.
Hi, yeah. So I'm brand new to grant writing altogether and not even sure how I was going to get started. So that's why I signed up to take the course. And I think one of the things that I can't remember what slide it was, but essentially making sure that the grant that you're going after is identifies what the needs that you're, I wouldn't go after a grant to, for public streets if I'm looking to, try to put porches on people's houses or something, but, I work in nutrition. And so making sure that I have a, basically essentially don't just go in with hoping that somebody is going to give consideration, but going in with a solid understanding of what it is that you're actually asking for and that you're asking the right people. And it just really being prepared and to show how there's going to be some sustainability afterwards. We're not just asking for money just to be asking for money to just do something one time and oh well. Sometimes things work out, sometimes they don't, but at least have an idea of where you're going with this. And
Yeah,
I
I appreciate you naming that, Latanya. And I think, part of what is difficult sometimes for our volunteers to know is how incredibly labor intensive it is to prepare and submit a grant proposal. A lot of times our board members will say, why don't we just, or why don't you just? Well, it's not always that simple. And so it is really important that we protect our time and our energy and our resources as we're approaching funders of any kind. And a way to ground that activity is really in getting clear on your need and your plan. And so that case for investment, that case for support, your organization's articulation of what you need, why you need it, and what you plan to do with that money, that is like ground zero. Don't ask anybody for anything until you know that. And also making sure that when you're approaching funders, it's well aligned with how you plan to capitalize your organization. Federal funding is incredibly complicated. The reporting requirements can be onerous, might not necessarily fit within your trajectory. So it's just important to know, right? Is this a fit or not? So thank you. Anna Maria. Oh, I saw something and then it disappeared. Can businesses also apply for grants or only nonprofits have been facing limitations with interest in food waste management? That depends. There are some organizations that will make investments and give funds to for-profit entities, but very rarely do our foundations do that. They exist to support the 501c3s, 501c4s, but there are some corporate investments that exist. It may look more like an investment than a philanthropic gift, though. B Corps are a structure that work for that. Also, LC3s are a structure that work for that, though in Michigan, right? So on either coast, there are really good examples of B Corps and LC3s. In Michigan, it is a tax structure and opportunity that exists, though it hasn't gained traction like it has on both of the coasts. All right, we're at time. I want to be mindful of, oh, good. Eileen just registered as an L3C. I'll stick around for another 5-10 if folks still have questions. But our time together is done. I encourage you to go for the gold. Get your seal of transparency. If you're an organization that doesn't yet have $1 million in revenue, you can get Foundation Directory access online for free once you get your gold seal of transparency through Candid. You should do it for many reasons, if nothing else, for credibility and just to check yourselves that you're doing the right thing, but also to have that access is really beneficial. Thank you. Thank you for sharing space with me.
And don't forget to sign up for the COAC newsletter so you can stay connected to COAC for all those valuable resources and programs.